very stylish Matt George, host of the Locked On Kings podcast, and he just
I gotta give it to him. He's looking fresh.
No, he just keeps unbuttoning buttons on his shirt, though. That's like every time I say his name, another button like goes flying.
Nah, bro, it's 2022. The chest hair is that's hot right now. That's hot right now, I'm telling you.
Okay.
It is. It is.
I ask myself.
He's going to be shirtless.
I mean, if it's what Chima would do, I ask myself every morning, what would Chima do? This is what Chima would do.
Just for those listening on 1320 AM, Matt George tweeted about Chima Moneke's style at the Kendrick Lamar concert when he was out with Keegan, De'Aaron, and I'm missing someone. I feel like there were 4 people in the picture.
And Keon was there too.
Oh, Keon. Okay, thank you. Keon Ellis was there. Chima had I think he had a sweatsuit on it. There were reports it was just a black sweatsuit.
No, he had a black button. He had a black button down on. I can't say the pants, but he had a black button down on. He had it unbuttoned. He had a nice chain or some kind of necklace, and then he had the headband with his good-looking glass. He just looked good. All right. So I aspire to look like Chima Moneke.
So Matt George quote tweeted the Kings with that picture and said, "I'm going to take style tips from Chima Moneke." Deuce Mason brought that to our attention earlier on the live stream. Matt was obviously around for that, so he has joined us here with his at work. By the way, he is at work dressed like this with his dress shirt. At this point, I believe it is completely unbuttoned. He has a pair of sunglasses on, and because I guess he didn't have his Chima Moneke headband around, he tied his tie around his head. Mm-hmm. So, and then he's got the IFB sticking out of his ear, which is a nice touch.
you missed the most important part. You missed Chima responding to the tweet saying he's got me. So Chima's my man now.
Oh, you in there?
And Chima, I want Chima to start. Chima should be a starter.
We can screenshot this and shoot this to Chima, or we could even just send him the whole video and say, "Hey, Brody, this is what you're working with."
Yeah.
And I'll get blocked.
Let's start with this, Matt. Donovan Mitchell is now a member of the Cleveland Cavaliers. You get that Woj bomb. Your first thoughts were what?
Wow. I think everybody else was wow. And then how many picks were involved? Because it took Woj way too long to give us the actual rundown of picks. Because I was like, I want to know what happens when the Utah Jazz are using the Cleveland 2046 pick to pick some player that's still involved in this deal. I think Utah honestly maybe could have gotten more. I'm not sure. Like, I haven't completely broken down the deal, but I've always been high on Donovan though. Like, I'm a big fan of Donovan Mitchell. I think he instantly vaults Cleveland into the top 4, top 5 in the West or Eastern Conference conversation. I don't put them as a favorite to come out of the East in the NBA Finals. I still put Boston and Philly and Brooklyn ahead of them, probably, assuming Brooklyn can stay healthy and actually want to play basketball this year. But I really like that squad. Every single year I pick a Eastern Conference team that I root for and that I follow closely, and they usually are my League Pass team. Last year was the Chicago Bulls. This year it's got to be Cleveland. And then I'll say this too. I'm also going to watch a lot of Indiana Pacers for obvious reasons.
Oh, of course, the whole world is. The whole damn world is. So, I'll watch some Pacers too. I'm gonna tell you this: when they're 20 and 55, I'm not watching the Pacers no more. Okay, when they're one of the worst teams in basketball, that's it. I ain't watching them.
I'm amazed you're giving them 20.
No, there's that too. 20. Tyrese won 20 by himself. So
yeah, that's true.
We already know that he needs a supporting cast. But you said that you thought they could have gotten more. They got essentially what, 7 picks. I'm including the pick swaps there, but they got 4 just straight picks from Cleveland, including the pick this year and the 2022 pick. And then 2 pick swaps. So they got 6.
I think it's 2 pick swaps. Yeah.
So they got 6 first round picks essentially out of this. You think they could have got more? Do you mean like more as far as like established NBA players or more?
That's where it's at. I think I was a little underwhelmed by the current talent, and I'm aware that you pull off this trade to basically stock up like your Sam Presti with draft picks. I know that's what they're doing, so we're not going to be able to really grade this trade until like 2-3 years minimum down the road. But I actually like Sexton. Like I think Colin Sexton kind of got a little bit of a bad rap in Cleveland a little bit, but like I think Donovan Mitchell is a very impactful player who kind of got lost behind all the drama and everything that was going on in Utah. I know his stock kind of dropped a little bit with how he performed in the playoffs this year. And a lot of people think he was more of a product of his environment in Utah. I disagree. I think Donovan Mitchell is a really, really, really damn good basketball player, really gifted offensive player who could be better defensively. I think he immediately makes the Cleveland Cavaliers significantly better. I know typically in star trades, you're never going to get value for value immediately across the board. But I don't, I mean, it's clear Utah is completely blowing things up. So I guess this is the best that maybe most could expect. But I was just a little underwhelmed by the actual player for player return a little bit. But it's probably because I'm a little too high on Donovan.
It's probably by design too. Like I think Colin Sexton, they're willing to give a shot, and they're doing that because you've got to put someone on the court, for goodness sakes, and you're doing it at a relatively. I mean, it's a 72-4. I think were the numbers. That's reasonable for a guy who I thought played, pretty well prior to Darius Garland's arrival, and then things shifted a little bit. The rest of it is the rest of it are take the names out. What matters are the contracts. Take the rest out. Add the dollars together, and that's probably why those deals were done. But let me welcome you to the Cleveland Cavaliers bandwagon. I think we're gonna have a fun time watching them this season. But you talk about Utah being, kind of in a full tank mode. Danny Ainge believing he could rebuild this thing, and I believe Danny Ainge probably believes he could rebuild this thing in Utah pretty quickly. But you got Utah and you got San Antonio. You got two teams that finished in the top 10 last year on their way out. What's that mean for Sacramento?
Oh, thank you, D'Lo. Let's do what we do best and take nothing that has absolutely nothing to do with the Sacramento Kings and make it about the Sacramento Kings.
What we do, baby.
I love that skill set that we possess, this curse that we possess. And I talked about this on the Locked On Kings podcast today. And I even tweeted this out. And I know I've said this before on the show, but it's even more so now. You would think someone who has watched the Sacramento Kings every single season for the last 16 seasons, you would think someone who's covered this team professionally for the last 7 seasons, that I would be able to fathom the idea of the Kings somehow failing again. Genuinely, I cannot comprehend the idea that the Sacramento Kings cannot be at minimum 10th best in the Western Conference. That is such a pathetically freaking low bar with this roster. You have to be better than one team that's not the 4 teams that are outright tanking. I don't care if it's Portland. I don't care if it's New Orleans. I don't care if it's LA, the Lakers. I don't know. I don't know who that team's going to be. Beat one freaking team. 10th best. You have to be better than just 5 teams in your conference, not in the NBA, in your conference. It's not a hard bar. So and if they miss out, you said heads will roll earlier, Kenny. It's the exact same words that I used on the podcast today. I cannot fathom what our conversations are like, what the media coverage is like, what is happening in the Kings organization if we get to February, March, and it's clear that the Sacramento Kings are out of the race. Again, barring any kind of, knock on wood, any kind of catastrophic injury situation. That's a completely different circumstance, and you can never map those out. If the Kings are, for the most part, healthy, it is a De'Aaron Fox, Domantas Sabonis-led team with all this depth that Monte McNair has added. If this team is incapable of being 10th freaking best, 10th best in the Western Conference, I don't know what the hell I'll do. I don't know where you go from there at that point. If you can't build a roster that is that mediocre, then maybe the Kings are truly cursed at that point.
It would be a complete embarrassment, Matt. Let's talk about it how we're talking about it here. It would be an embarrassment if this particular roster wasn't able to get it done. And I've heard people say, and this is, I don't know where it stems from as far as Monte McNair not having an extension, but I mean, this would be a bit of a litmus test for the Kings if they were trying to bring him back. Monte, you can't get this done, then we gotta move on. We gotta move on because this is, I said it earlier, this is as good of an opportunity to get in the postseason as this team has had in the last 16 years. Roster and the setup of the entire conference. This is as good as it's gotten.
Yeah, where I want to push back is you're right. Like at that point, Monty's out of a job, and everybody's on the table at that point, and everybody's up for blame. Mike Brown you just signed him to, what was it, a 4-year contract or something like that. Mike Brown's certainly under some heat at that point. Although I hope the Kings wouldn't be stupid enough to fire him after 1 year and be paying another head coach for the next 3 years. But like at that point, you have to look at this roster. You have to look at every single player on this roster, especially the bigger names on this roster. And I don't need to name any names, and it's not just the two obvious ones. It's everybody. You have to look at this roster and go, what the hell is wrong with you? Like at some point, like Monty has built a team that by all belief across the league makes sense. No one's looking at this roster and going, man, this team is an absolute bona fide certified playoff team. Like no one's saying that. But looking at this roster, I guarantee you 99% of the league is looking at this going, this team is capable of being a play-in team. Like if you can't accomplish that, I have a hard time how do I put that on Monty? How do I put that on Mike Brown? Like I got to put that on the guys who are supposed to go out there and play the game. That are like this team, in my opinion, in the Western Conference, this team could have the most basic playbook on the planet, which is kind of one of the things that Dave Yeager was saying during his time here. They could have the most basic playbook on the planet. The talent of this team and the, in theory, system that this team can easily run, fast pace, attacking the basket, surrounding with shooters, pick and roll with Domantas Sabonis. Like pickup wise, this team has enough talent to be 10th best in the Western Conference. If you can't accomplish that, like everybody is accountable for that at this point.
Absolutely. Those players will be gone. But to be fair, and I don't want it to be the case. I'm not saying it will be. But Monty McNair, this is 2 different sets of players that you've picked, that maybe even 3 that you've picked that can't get it done. So while it's not your fault because you're not out there on the court, you keep picking these guys that can't get the job done. So we need to find somebody else.
Matt doesn't think Monty's going to be the GM, though. See, him and Jason Jones had a little conspiracy theory in a recent episode of the Locked On Kings podcast, where I was like, hey, I've got some Locked On episodes. I got 2 Locked On episodes to catch up on. I like to walk Sprout and just relax, enjoy the early morning, and on comes Jason Jones, and here comes this thing about Wes Wilcox and Mike Brown, and I'm like, hey, what the hell is going on here? And now, to be fair, for those who haven't listened, Jason was like, listen, this is what you hear rumblings. It's not something you're outwardly, hey, this is what's happening in Sacramento. You hear rumblings because people are trying to figure out what's going on with Monty McNair, why he hasn't signed a contract extension. Plus, you could say Vivek Ranadive is getting advice from aliens in outer space and float that around NBA circles, and someone would believe it.
And absolutely report it.
Hey, we did our best to try and be, honestly, the conversation started out really positive. I actually had to change the order of the conversation because when I asked him about, and he went off on that conspiracy theory, that was like 2/3 of the way through the interview. I was like, well, this is going to be the meat and potatoes of it. I have to start with it. But we were talking about, like, Jason was also hyping up this roster too. He thinks this roster is going to be, is the best that they've had during the 16 years. He thinks that Mike Brown is the best head coach that the Sacramento Kings have had since Rick Adelman. Thank you. So, and if Jason's showing some love as Sacramento Kings fans, like Jason doesn't hold back. So, but the conspiracy theory absolutely had to make its way out there. So I appreciate Jason for coming on. I love that, man.
I think it's people just trying to figure it out. Like, why hasn't Monty McNair been signed to a contract extension? You've given him the time to, you've given him time to invest. Like this team, like that's his. Mm-hmm. But I guess, I don't know. I still kind of think one will get done before the season starts, but man, and then there's always was a theory we threw out there however many months ago. Maybe it's not the Kings, maybe it's Monty.
Yeah. I think the marriage for both of them should be, hey, let's work together, let's get this done. But that could absolutely be the case that the Kings wanted to sign him to a contract extension, and he said, I'm not sure I want to be here. I'm not sure I want to continue doing this. Let me figure this out with myself and my family and see if this is what we still want to do. And they've got the Kings in limbo. That is a possibility as well.
I just don't know. We've talked about this too. Whether it's Monty, whether it's Mike Brown, whether it's roster, I don't know where the Sacramento Kings can possibly go with this roster if it doesn't work out. Like, I'm even disappointed by them making, and we've talked about this before, if they make the play in 10th seed, 9th seed, 8th, 7th, doesn't matter. If they make the play in, especially if they have a home game and they lose 2 in a row and they actually don't make the playoffs, yeah, I'm disappointed by that too, because play-in, even though it's technically postseason, it's not playoffs, and playoffs are the goal that I need, and playoffs are also the goal that Monty has said repeatedly, and the Kings front office has said repeatedly, and we know the players come media day are going to say repeatedly. So that's the standard that I'm holding this team to. But bar minimum, this is a play-in team. Like, the play-in is made for opportunity like this, even if the Western Conference is stacked. And you look at the Sacramento Kings roster, and again, I could be foolish after all the years that I've covered this team, and I maybe should know better. But if we get to the end of the year and Sacramento's on the outside looking in again, I at that point, I'm turning my camera on and just staring at the camera and popping a mic open saying, I have no idea what to say at this point, because I don't know where the Kings go.
Well, as long as you do it with a tie tied around your head and your sunglasses on, it'll be worth watching.
That might be all I have left.
We're such a joke. Did you see Field Yates's tweet?
Yeah, and I've been debating whether or not to respond to that.
I just saw this is my first. This was tweeted 2 hours ago. Field Yates, the NFL reporter, he wrote an updated NBA draft order for each of the next 5 years. 1, Thunder. 2, Jazz. 3, Thunder. Then it goes Jazz, Thunder, Jazz, Kings, Jazz, Thunder, Jazz.
We're in there, baby.
I don't think that's a good thing, Matthew.
No, not a good thing at all. But, these are the things that we talk about where, hey, man, as long as you continue not to win, they're going to, you're going to be the butt of the joke. That's just when you win, then you can.
NFL reporters.
Low-hanging fruit.
What is happening? Yeah, that's 100% right, man. It's low-hanging fruit. I'm choosing. I'm looking at the quote. I'm hoping he got eviscerated, but
I'm choosing to ride with those who are finally coming around. Like you have, of course, Mark Spears, who said on TV multiple times he believes the Kings are breaking the streak. I think Sports Illustrated's Chris Mannix has said he's jumping on the Kings bandwagon. So those are the people I'm riding with. I'm with them. I like them. And if they're wrong, they're idiots, not me this time.
Boy, riding with Chris Mannix, that's a tough trip right there, buddy.
This particular version of Chris Mannix on this very specific incident and moment in time. It's a short ride.
It's Kenny's guy. You could bring him with you.
No. I'll get my own ride. How about that? I'll get my own ride. I don't need to be in that minivan.
I'll bring you into, and I'm sure you were listening, a conversation with Deuce Mo. Where are you on Portland? Because if the Lakers, because there's 2 spots, there's clearly 2 spots. San Antonio's done, Utah's done. People say, "Well, the Lakers are getting one of those spots," and I get that. The Lakers were a mess last year, but they were also bad. Like, so both things can be true. But fine, we'll give them a spot. It really boils down to, because you don't have anything left except Oklahoma City and Houston. It really boils down to Sacramento and Portland. Where are you on Portland?
When comparing the two teams, Portland has the clear, no doubt star, right? The best player, that's easy. That's not up for debate. It's Damian Lillard. But the Sacramento Kings have a better team. They're a more well-constructed team. They're more of a win-now team. Like, the Sacramento Kings, in my opinion, should absolutely be better than the Portland Trailblazers this year. And I give Dame his credit. I give him his circumstances. There are going to be games where Dame quite literally puts everything on his back and wins it for him. And hell, maybe a game or two like that might be against the Sacramento Kings this year. I sure as hell hope not. I expect opening night, Kings and Portland Trailblazers, I expect Kings to show why they're a little bit different. Like, especially with the Kings, or in the necessity, in my opinion, for the Kings to get off to a good start this year. Like, the Portland Trailblazers are trending down. Like, the Sacramento Kings are trending up. And that should show itself both in the standings, and that should show itself on the floor where we watch those two teams. And my podcast today, I looked at the Kings bench and I compared the Kings bench to every other bench. I took the 5, basically a Kings depth chart. I took the 5 bench players at each position, even though I think the Kings are going to have a 9-man rotation, wrote down their numbers, and I compared them to every single squad, every single other team, and their bench 5 players and their numbers and eye test and things like that in the league. And I basically decided which were better and which were worse than the Sacramento Kings, starters wise and bench wise. And bench wise, between the Kings and Blazers, it's not even close. Like, I think the Kings bench is significantly better than the Blazers bench. And starters wise, with the exception of Damian Lillard, like, I think the Kings have a significantly well-rounded lineup, better depth. Like, to me, basketball wise, as good as Dame time is, and as much as I love watching him play, I think the Kings should separate themselves pretty quickly.
Yeah, I look at that Portland Trailblazers team, and they're not awful or anything like that. I mean, they've got players that I like on there, but if I had to choose, who do I think is going to have the better season and who has the better team right now, I'd say it's the Sacramento Kings. And I agree with you, Matt, where the depth is something that makes me feel that way. But I also just wonder how granted, I'm not following Portland and what they do, but how does that team mesh together? Like, how do they work together? They've got individual players that I like with, like I said, Dame and Grant and Anthony Simons and Nurkic. Like, I like those guys. Obviously, I like Shaedon Sharpe, whatever he's able to give them in his rookie year. But how do they mesh together? Is that something that works together on the court? I don't know. We don't know about the Kings, but I feel like the pieces fit a little bit better just looking at things on paper.
Well, the way I look at it too is if the Kings are worried about the Portland Trail Blazers, then we're in trouble. Like, that's what I'm looking at it. Like, I think it's realistic to say the Kings and Blazers might end up battling for the 10th spot, but I also think the Sacramento Kings should be battling for 7 and 8. Like, I don't think that's unrealistic for this group. So if they're worried about the Trailblazers and the Trailblazers alone and not even thinking about being on the tier of maybe the Pelicans, I don't know, maybe the Timberwolves, maybe the Lakers. Like, if they're not worried about being on that tier, then what the hell are we talking about? We're talking about a team that's just scratching and clawing their way into the play-in and that no one expects to win 2 games to actually get to the playoffs themselves, which, again, that's the goal of the team. That's the goal. That's the standard that I'm setting. Even though they haven't made it in 16 years, I'm not saying that the Kings should automatically be vaulted into the playoffs just because this roster has been improved. They got to earn it. They got to prove it to themselves. They got to prove it to us. They got to prove it to the rest of the NBA, or those jokes aren't going to stop, right? Mm-hmm. But at the same time, like, if you're worried about your biggest competition, one team for the bare minimum 10th spot, you're not a playoff team. Like, you're not a team that belongs in any kind of playoff picture or playoff conversation. The Sacramento Kings are better than that. They need to shoot higher than that. So it's something that we can talk about, but I don't want to hear any concern, even if there's respect for Dame, even if there's respect for Shaedon Sharpe. And I'm excited to see how Shaedon looks because we still haven't seen him. Like, and maybe they are better than I'm giving them credit for right now. And if so, I'll happily raise my hand and say, man, I disrespected the Portland Trailblazers. But the Sacramento Kings right now can't be worried about Trailblazers or any one team that could be the team to knock them out of the freaking play-in tournament. That shouldn't even be in their mindset.
Yeah, it's interesting looking at Portland because I agree with both of your assessments, and you said they're trending down, which I agree with, but they're not trending down from where they were last year.
Right.
Because last year is an anomaly. So if they're trending down from, a 45, 46 win team, like, how far down are they going? Because, we did this with the Lakers as it pertains to LeBron and Anthony Davis. Like, it's a different team if Dame Lillard is playing. You've added Jeremy Grant. That's an interesting situation because he's only there. He could only be there till February if this thing doesn't go well, but he's there for this year. It's not they brought in Gary Payton. It's not, I didn't get the Yusuf Nurkic. I don't know why they did that, but not that Yerk is a bad ball. I just don't get it. I agree they're trending down, but I wonder if they're trending down to where now it's the Portland Trailblazers that aren't a 5 or 6 or 7 team anymore. They're a 10. That's what they are. They're in that category. But I agree with you. The Kings have to be. We can't be headed into the final week of the season going, okay, they got to go 3-1 to get the 10th spot. that either means the Western Conference was an animal or things didn't go well.
Regardless of the expectations, regardless of how the West does, like, the Kings have to be different. Like, they to me, they just have to have a different mindset, have a different approach. They can't afford to wait. Now, maybe like things happen and it ends up being you have to win 3 out of your final 4 games to secure it. Like things happen all the time, things that you can't control. But my point is, I don't want the Kings at any point this season to be reliant upon other teams winning or losing for them to secure their spot. Unless it's like, wow, we have a chance to get 6 if the Memphis Grizzlies completely collapse. Like that's a different conversation.
Sure. I got
completely. But if the Sacramento Kings are like, man, we need the schedule to, like, we dropped too many games early on to now we need to rely on Portland falling apart, or we need to hope that the Houston Rockets somehow beat the Los Angeles Lakers in March. Like, then at that point, we're in the same damn boat and it's already a failure, in my opinion.
Let me ask you the question I've asked everybody else today about this roster, about this Kings roster. Barring some type of all-star, Donovan Mitchell, Kevin Durant being available, do you think this roster is about done? Like, should they be looking to make more moves? Should they be looking? I mentioned earlier some of the guys on Utah, like Bojan, Jordan Clarkson, all those guys. I like those guys as individual players, but they seem a little repetitive to what the Kings already have. Do you think they should be looking to make any other moves anywhere?
It's a cliche that Monty uses, although I think it's the correct approach. He's always keeping himself open-minded. He's talked about flexibility. Anytime there's a Monty McNair press conference, the word flexibility comes up. And that's been kind of his MO since the very beginning, right? Whether it's keeping the cap sheet flexible, keeping player availability flexible so that if players become available, he can make those moves. But I look at this roster the way it is right now, and the reason why I think we're set, Kenny, is I look at the pieces on this roster and I go, at this point, who do you move to get better that's realistic? Like, some of the best trade pieces or movable pieces you have on this roster are players that you just acquired, right? Like a Malik Monk, a Kevin Huerter. These are pieces that you just acquired. Of course, Harrison Barnes is the elephant in the room that we've talked about a million times and we'll continue to talk about probably until the trade deadline. But I don't see any trade out there that you move on from Harrison Barnes right now that makes your team better or even stays neutral. I don't think that trade exists. So I don't know. I think at this point, Sacramento is set based off of the fact that they have surrounded it. The belief was always Fox and Sabonis are going to take us as far as we're going to go. We got to surround them with the pieces necessary. They've done that. So sure, there are probably better pieces out there to accomplish that goal a little bit more. But what do you have to acquire with those pieces? And you can't say, we'll just throw a bunch of picks out there too, because you have to remember the pick involvement in the Kevin Huerter trade. So Sacramento's already kind of locked up with that a little bit. So as of right now, I think Monty has played his cards. It's not the sexiest hand on the planet. It's not an absolute winning hand, but his offseason should be done. And I think he should feel confident going into training camp and going into next season that he's built the correct squad, and then let the time on the floor play things out. And then as the NBA regular season goes on and players suddenly become available that weren't available before at the trade deadline, that's when you reevaluate. That's when you suddenly say, hey, maybe we're moving on from Barnes, or maybe Malik Monk is playing super, super well and you move him into the starting lineup, and maybe Kevin Huerter has value at the trade deadline. Like, anything can happen over the course of the season. Maybe Rashawn Holmes plays his way into having value around the league too. I think we need game and regular season narrative and experience and numbers to open up the market again for Sacramento.
I hate that when you said, players that weren't available that might be available now. The first player I thought of was Harrison. Like, you were talking about around the league, and I immediately thought, oh, what if that's Harrison?
Mm-hmm.
And I again, I get it. It's what James Ham fights about when we have this discussion about Harrison Barnes is managing assets. And I completely understand that. But as you just laid out, as Kenny's talked about, I don't know where you improve that position. Like, I don't know where you improve that. If it's not Harrison, who is it? Who gets you? But I don't think that exists. Realistically, I don't think that it exists. Harrison is a great piece for something. But that something isn't out there. Harrison Barnes is a king. And hey, man, if things work, maybe Harrison, because I feel a lot of the reason Harrison Barnes might not be a king moving forward is because Harrison's like, hey, man, I did my time. I've done my time. Like, I'll continue. I'll fulfill my contractual duties, or you guys do what you got to do. I'm gonna play ball either way, and then I'm gonna go do my thing. Maybe if things work out well, 2-3 more years with Harrison Barnes here, they could change Harrison Barnes' mind.
I think that's the gamble the Kings are willing to take. And look, we don't know Harrison's motivations. Is he money motivated to get one last major bag? If so, I don't blame him. Is he winning motivated after the last 4 years that he's had of his career? Wouldn't blame him at all for that either. But the Kings could potentially offer both. Like the Kings could be in a position where they can offer him the most money, or they would be willing to pay him more money than his market value is because Sacramento tax. And the Kings could be in a position where they're on the rise and he's an important part of that rise. Like if the Kings do make the playoffs, 7th, 8th seed, win the play-in, make the playoffs, and the best case scenario I threw out there on Locked On Kings was, let's say it's Kings and Warriors in the opening round of the playoffs, which would be awesome because that's never happened before. Say the Kings at best win 2 of those games, which seems like a reach. Like let's say the Kings win 1 of those games, but you can see a team that ends the season with momentum, a la what the Phoenix Suns were able to do in the bubble, but different, right? And it's a team that you're going into the offseason going, okay, you accomplished your goal. Now you have to improve, but we're feeling good about it. Like that sounds like a situation where Harrison Barnes might be significantly more on board than he would be right now when that team hasn't come remotely close to that yet. I think that's a gamble that Monty and the Kings are willing to take because just like me, I don't think Monty and the Kings at this point can fathom the idea that this team is not playing in postseason of some sort.
Yeah. That, like I said, I know, much like you, Matt, I know every time that we've been excited for a team before, we've seen a lot of losing back. I get all that.
Yep.
It'd be crazy if they didn't make the play-in. I mean, it would be the new worst year of all time in Sacramento, which was last year. It would be the new one because they have the talent, in my opinion, at least on paper, to get to that point. The West, the way it's set up with potentially 4 teams that are out and then a couple iffy teams, like you can Portland can, get over the Kings. We get all that, but you can absolutely be better than Portland. You can absolutely be better than whoever is 8 or 9 or something like that. If you're playing at a high level, it's all right there for you. Yeah. It's all right there for you. There's no way that after the last game of the regular season, we should be done with Kings basketball.
Real quick, D-Lo, I'm going to take this in another really quick direction, but I want to make sure I use your platform to cut a little babyface promo really quick here.
Oh, Joe.
There's so Fiba action is going on right now. Chima Moneke, or sorry, not Chima. Chimezi Metu, thank you. Brain is playing for Nigeria. I think he's leading Nigeria in scoring. You have Nemais Keita, of course, Domantas Sabonis, and I haven't really addressed it too much on Locked On Kings or covered it too much on Locked On Kings. I don't know how much coverage you guys have put out there because it felt disingenuous because our guy, Brendan Nunez with Kings Pulse has been doing amazing work on covering FIBA. Like I put Brendan up there in his FIBA coverage with like Jill Adge and her front office shirts or search coverage. Like he just goes so in depth. He does breakdowns. I think he and Chris Watkins did like breakdowns of games or rewatch games, and I paid attention to that. So I want to make sure to give him some love a little bit. And if you're looking to follow FIBA stuff, like follow what Brendan is doing over there because he's given me insight. I'm a little disappointed that we haven't really seen the 3-point shot from Sabonis to this point. I'm not too worried about his numbers. I'm more wanting to see that jumper, and I haven't seen too much of it. But with the FIBA action going on in Kingsland right now, and I know there's always concerns with summer basketball and players getting hurt. Again, knock on wood, but Brendan's doing phenomenal work over there covering FIBA.
Yeah, great stuff from Brendan. Domantas Sabonis isn't unveiling that 3-point shot until October.
He's keeping it under wraps.
That's not for FIBA's consumption. That is for Sacramento. We should probably let you go, get dressed and go to work. All right.
I got one more button.
Please don't lean back any further. I'm begging. Please don't lean back any further. That is Matt George, host of the Locked On Kings podcast, and of course, tremendous work over on ABC.